For a second, they thought the room was full of people, hundreds of people, all seated and all perfectly still. Polly and Diggory, as you might guess, stood perfectly still themselves for a good long time, looking in. But presently they decided that what they were looking at could not be real people. There was not a movement nor the sound of a breath among them all. They were all like the most wonderful waxworks you ever saw. This time, Polly took the lead. There was something in this room which interested her more than it interested Diggory. All the figures were wearing magnificent clothes. If you were interested in clothes at all, you could hardly help going in to see them closer. And the blaze of their colours made this room look not exactly cheerful, but at any rate rich and majestic after all the dust and emptiness of the others. It had more windows too, and it was a good deal lighter. I can hardly describe the clothes. The figures were all robed and had crowns on their heads. Their robes were of crimson and silvery grey and deep purple and vivid green, and there were patterns and pictures of flowers and strange beasts in needlework all over them. Precious stones of astonishing size and brightness stared from their crowns and hung in chains around their necks and peeped out from all the places where anything was fastened. "Why haven't these clothes all rotted away long ago?" asked Polly. "Magic," whispered Diggory. "Can't you feel it? I bet this whole room is just stiff with enchantments. I could feel it the moment we came in." "Any one of these dresses would cost hundreds of pounds," said Polly. But Diggory was more interested in the faces, and indeed these were well worth looking at. The people sat in their stone chairs on each side of the room, and the floor was left free down the middle. You could walk down and look at the faces in turn. "They were nice people, I think," said Diggory, and Polly nodded. All the faces they could see were certainly nice. Both the men and the women looked kind and wise, and they seemed to come from a handsome race. But after the children had gone a few steps down the room, there came to faces that looked different. These were very solemn faces. You felt you would have to mind your P's and Q's if ever you met living people who looked like that. When they'd got a little further, they found themselves among faces they didn't like. This was about the middle of the room. The faces here looked very strong and proud and happy, but they looked cruel. A little further on, they looked crueler still. Further on, they were still cruel, but they no longer looked happy. They were even despairing faces, as if the people they belonged to had done dreadful things and also suffered dreadful things. The last figure of all was the most interesting. A woman even more richly dressed than the others, very tall. But every figure in that room was taller than the people of our world, with a look of such fierceness and pride that it took your breath away. Yet she was beautiful too. Years afterwards, when he was an old man, Diggory said he'd never in his life known a woman so beautiful. It's only fair to add that Polly always said she couldn't see anything specially beautiful about her. This woman, as I said, was the last, but there were plenty of empty chairs beyond her, as if the room had been intended for a much larger collection of images. "Oh, I do wish we knew the story behind all this," said Diggory. "Let's go back and look at that table sort of thing in the middle of the room." The thing in the middle of the room was not exactly a table. It was a square pillar of about 4 feet high, and on there rose a little golden arch from which there hung a little golden bell. And beside this there lay a little golden hammer to hit the bell with. I wonder, said Diggory. "There seems to be something written here," said Polly, stooping down and looking at the side of the pillar. "By gum, so there is," said Diggory. "But of course we shan't be able to read it." "Shan't we? I'm not so sure," said Polly. They both looked at it hard, and as you might have expected, the letters cut in the stone were strange. But now a great wonder happened, for as they looked, Though the shape of the letters never altered, they found that they could understand them. If only Diggory had remembered what he himself had said a few minutes ago, that this was an enchanted room, he might have guessed that the enchantment was beginning to work. But he was too wild with curiosity to think about that. He was longing more and more to know what was written on the pillar. And very soon they both knew. What it said was something like this. At least this is the sense of it through the poetry. When you read it here, when you read it there, it was better. Make your choice, adventurous stranger. Strike the bell and bide the danger. Or wonder till it drives you mad what would have followed if you had. No fear, said Polly. We don't want any danger. Oh, but don't you see it's no good, said Diggory. We can't get out of it now. We shall always be wondering what else would have happened if we struck the bell. I'm not going home to be driven mad by always thinking of that. No fear. Don't be silly, said Polly, as if anyone would. What does it matter what would have happened? I expect anyone who's come as far as this is bound to go on wondering till it sends him dotty. That's the magic of it, you see. I can feel it beginning to work on me already. Well, I don't, said Polly crossly, and I don't believe you do either. You're just putting it on. That's all you know, said Diggory. It's because you're a girl. Girls never want to know anything but gossip and rot about people getting engaged. You looked exactly like your uncle when you said that, said Polly. Why can't you keep to the point, said Diggory. What we're talking about is... How exactly like a man, said Polly in a very grown-up voice. But she added hastily in a real voice, and don't you say I'm just like a woman or you'll be a beastly copycat. I should never dream of calling a kid like you a woman, said Diggory loftily. Oh, I'm a kid, am I, said Polly, who was now in a real rage. Well, you needn't bother by having a kid with you any longer then. I'm off. I've had enough of this place and enough of you too, you beastly stuck-up, obstinate pig. None of that, said Diggory in a voice even nastier than he meant it to be, for he saw Polly's hand moving to her pocket to get hold of her yellow ring. I can't excuse what he did next, except to say that he was very sorry for it afterwards, and so were a good many other people. Before Polly's hand reached her pocket, he grabbed her wrist, leaning across her with his back against her chest. Then, keeping her other arm out of the way with his other elbow, he leaned forward, picked up the hammer, and struck the golden bell a smart tap. Then he let her go, and they fell apart, staring at each other and breathing hard. Polly was just beginning to cry, not with fear, and not even because he'd hurt her wrist quite badly, but with furious anger. Within 2 seconds, however, they had something to think about that drove their own quarrels quite out of their minds. As soon as the bell was struck, it gave out a note, a sweet note as you might have expected, and not very loud. But instead of dying away again, it went on, and as it went on, it grew louder. Before a minute had passed, it was twice as loud as it had been to begin with. It was soon so loud that if the children had tried to speak, but they weren't thinking of speaking now, they were just standing with their mouths open, they would not have heard one another. Very soon it was so loud that they couldn't have heard one another even by shouting, and still it grew. All on one note, a continuous sweet note, though the sweetness had something horrible about it, till all the air in that great room was throbbing with it, and they could feel the stone floor trembling under their feet. Then, at last, it began to be mixed with another sound, a vague, disastrous noise which sounded first like the roar of a distant train, and then like a crash of a falling tree. They heard something like great weights falling. Finally, with a sudden rush and thunder and a shake that nearly flung them off their feet, about a quarter of the roof at one end of the room fell in. Great blocks of masonry fell all around them, and the walls rocked. The noise of the bell stopped. The clouds of dust cleared away, and everything became quiet again. It was never found out whether the fall of the roof was due to magic or whether that unbearably loud sound from the bell just happened to strike the note, which was more than those crumbling walls could stand. There. I hope you're satisfied now, panted Polly. Well, it's all over, said Diggory. And they both thought it was, but they had never been more mistaken in their lives.